in just 31 seconds. $400 million in constitutional violations. Kash Patel didn't expect the trap. He walked into it willingly. Cameras captured everything. The Senate chamber froze. What did Adam Schiff reveal that made the FBI Director nominee completely collapse on live television? At exactly 2:47 p.m. on January 15, 2025, the Hart Senate office building buzzed with the electric tension that only accompanies the most consequential confirmation hearings in American history. The mahogany-paneled committee room, with its towering windows and marble columns, had witnessed decades of political theater, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold. C-SPAN cameras positioned at every angle, their red recording lights creating an ominous constellation across the room's ceiling. In the gallery, reporters from every major network leaned forward in their seats, fingers poised over smartphones and laptops, sensing that history was about to be made. Kash Patel walked in like an investigator who had seen too many lies. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, his FBI badge pin gleaming under the harsh committee room lights, stack of declassified memos clutched in his left hand, encrypted USB drives visible in his breast pocket. The man who had spent years exposing what he called the deep state now sat before the very institution he had promised to reform. His dark eyes scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to being the hunter, not the hunted. Across the curved committee table, Adam Schiff sat like a prosecutor who had already found the smoking gun. The California Democrat's silver hair was combed back with mathematical precision, his hands folded calmly over a manila folder that seemed almost casual in its simplicity. Behind him, 3 junior staffers arranged briefing papers with the quiet efficiency of a legal team preparing for the kill shot. Schiff's reading glasses caught the overhead lights as he reviewed his notes one final time, each page movement deliberate and calculated. The morning had proceeded routinely. Republican senators lobbed softball questions about Patel's qualifications, his vision for the Bureau, his commitment to fighting crime. Patel answered with the confident authority of someone who had briefed presidents and testified before Congress dozens of times. His voice carried across the room with practiced ease, hitting every talking point his confirmation team had rehearsed for weeks. Senator Johnson, the FBI will return to its core mission under my leadership, Patel declared, his hands gesturing with the controlled passion of a man who believed every word he spoke. No more political witch hunts. No more targeting of American citizens for their political beliefs. We will investigate crimes, not conservatives. The Republican gallery applauded. Fox News cameras zoomed in for reaction shots. Even some Democratic staffers nodded approvingly at his articulate responses. This was going exactly as Patel's team had planned. But Adam Schiff had been waiting. The former House Intelligence Committee chairman had spent months studying every Patel interview, every congressional testimony, every public statement. He had identified the weakness that Patel himself didn't know existed. In a manila folder marked constitutional compliance, Schiff had compiled a series of questions so simple, so fundamental, that any honest answer would either expose hypocrisy or reveal dangerous authoritarian tendencies. Mr. Patel, Schiff began, his voice cutting through the post-lunch chatter like a blade through silk. The room instinctively quieted. Reporters stopped typing. Even the C-SPAN camera operators seemed to lean in closer. Patel looked up from his prepared notes, his expression shifting from confident to alert. Something in Schiff's tone had changed the atmosphere. The FBI nominee straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. I want to follow up on Senator Kennedy's line of questioning, Schiff continued, his reading glasses reflecting the overhead lights as he opened his folder with surgical precision. I'd like to ask a similar series of yes or no questions, just to put a finer point on your answers and make sure they're as definitive as they sounded. The trap was being set, though Patel didn't realize it yet. Around the room, veteran political observers recognized the shift. This wasn't casual questioning anymore. This was a prosecutorial examination, and Schiff was moving in for the kill. Yes or no, Mr. Patel? Schiff's voice carried the weight of constitutional authority. Would you ever advise the administration that it could ignore or disregard an applicable district court order because you believe the Supreme Court will ultimately overturn it? The question hung in the air, like smoke from a gunshot. Simple, direct, fundamental to the rule of law in America, the kind of question that should have been answered in 2 letters. No. But Patel hesitated. His 31 seconds. That's all it took for everything to unravel. Patel's confident expression flickered. His eyes darted briefly to his legal team seated behind him, then back to Schiff. His mouth opened, then closed. The hands that had been gesturing confidently moments before now gripped the edge of the witness table, knuckles whitening under the pressure. "Senator, as I said before," Patel began, his voice lacking its earlier authority. "Just yes or no," Schiff interrupted, his tone remaining perfectly calm, perfectly reasonable. "I want to make sure you're not misleading anyone." The interruption hit like a physical blow. Patel's face flushed slightly, a red tinge creeping up his neck. In the gallery, photographers' cameras clicked frantically, capturing every micro-expression of discomfort. "I don't want to speculate, but I can't see a situation where I would advise not following a court order," Patel finally managed, his words tumbling out faster than usual. "So your answer is no?" Schiff pressed, leaning forward slightly. "You would never advise the administration to disregard a district court order, even if you thought the Supreme Court might rule differently." Patel's breathing became visible. His chest rose and fell more rapidly as he realized he was caught between constitutional principle and political loyalty. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was actually only 8 seconds. "I don't want to speak in absolutes," Patel said, his voice now noticeably strained. "I can't see a time where I would do that, but Schiff's eyebrows raised slightly. The single word carried the weight of a gavel. The room held its breath. C-SPAN's live feed captured every moment of Patel's visible distress. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass, taking a sip that everyone in the room knew was a desperate attempt to buy time. "No," Patel finally whispered, the word barely audible, but the damage was done. In those 31 seconds, Adam Schiff had exposed what legal experts would later call the authoritarian tell. A nominee for FBI Director had been unable to give an immediate, unequivocal commitment to following court orders. The pause, the hesitation, the qualifier, all of it had been captured on live television and transmitted to millions of Americans. The chamber erupted. Democratic senators leaned into their microphones demanding clarification. Republican senators huddled with their staffs, damage control already beginning. In the press gallery, reporters frantically typed breaking news alerts. "Patel hesitates on court order question," began trending on Twitter within minutes. But Schiff wasn't finished. "Mr. Patel," he continued, his voice carrying the authority of constitutional law itself, "would you agree that it would be unlawful for the president to accept a gift from a foreign state without the consent of Congress?" Another simple question. Another constitutional fundamental, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 of the Constitution, the Emoluments Clause, written in language so clear that even a first-year law student could quote it. Patel's face drained of color. The confident prosecutor had become the cornered defendant, and everyone in the room could see it. His legal team behind him exchanged worried glances. The FBI nominee who had promised to restore constitutional order to the Bureau was about to be undone by the Constitution itself. "Well, Senator," Patel began, his voice cracking slightly, "that would depend on the facts and circumstances." "It depends," Schiff's voice cut through the air like a prosecutor who had just heard a confession. "Mr. Patel, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 says, and I quote, 'No person holding any office of profit or trust under the United States shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office or title, of any kind whatever, from any king, prince or foreign state.'" Schiff leaned back in his chair, his voice taking on the tone of a constitutional law professor addressing a failing student. "It doesn't say it depends. It doesn't say maybe. It says no person shall. Do you find that language ambiguous?" The silence that followed was deafening. Patel's mouth moved, but no words came out. The man who had built his career on exposing corruption in government was being exposed himself, not for corruption, but for something potentially worse: a willingness to ignore the Constitution when politically convenient. Cameras zoomed in on Patel's face, capturing every bead of sweat, Every nervous blink, every moment of his public breakdown. The FBI Director nominee, who had walked into the hearing room as the confident future of law enforcement was disintegrating in real time. CNN broke into regular programming. Breaking. FBI nominee Patel struggles with basic constitutional questions. Fox News, desperately trying to provide cover, led with Democrats' launch partisan attack on Patel. But even conservative commentators couldn't explain away what millions of Americans had just witnessed. In the hearing room, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a routine confirmation hearing had become a constitutional crisis in miniature. The man nominated to lead the nation's premier law enforcement agency had just demonstrated, on live television, that he might not be committed to the most basic principle of American democracy, that no one, not even the president, is above the law. Social media exploded. Patel meltdown trended worldwide. Legal scholars from Harvard to Stanford published instant analyses of the constitutional implications. Former FBI directors, both Republican and Democrat, expressed grave concerns about what they had witnessed. But perhaps most damaging of all were the 31 seconds themselves. 31 seconds that would be replayed endlessly on cable news, clipped and shared millions of times on social media, and studied in law schools as an example of how constitutional principles can be tested in real time. As the hearing recessed, Patel remained seated at the witness table, staring down at his hands. His legal team surrounded him, whispering urgent advice. But everyone in the room knew that something fundamental had changed. The FBI Director nominee, who had promised to restore constitutional order, had just shown in the most public way possible that he might not understand what constitutional order actually means. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours, 3 Republican senators announced they were reviewing their support for Patel's nomination. Legal experts across the political spectrum questioned whether someone who couldn't immediately commit to following court orders should lead the FBI. Editorial boards that had been prepared to support a qualified law enforcement professional now faced the reality of a nominee who had stumbled over the most basic constitutional questions. Adam Schiff, for his part, simply gathered his papers and left the hearing room. He had done what he came to do. In 31 seconds of careful questioning, he had exposed the dangerous mindset that lurked beneath Patel's confident exterior. The trap had been simple, elegant, and devastatingly effective. As evening fell on Washington, political observers struggled to remember a confirmation hearing that had gone so wrong so quickly. Patel's team worked frantically to explain, clarify, and contextualize his answers, but in the age of social media and instant analysis, 31 seconds of hesitation about following the Constitution was 31 seconds too many. The man who had promised to be the FBI's constitutional guardian had been undone by the Constitution itself, and Adam Schiff, the prosecutor turned congressman, had simply asked him to explain what it meant to follow the law. Sometimes the most devastating traps are the simplest ones of all. The hearing would reconvene the next morning, but everyone knew that Patel's nomination was effectively over. In 31 seconds, a career built on exposing others had been exposed itself. The constitutional crisis Patel had warned about hadn't come from the deep state or partisan Democrats. It had come from his own inability to say, without hesitation, that he would follow the law. As C-SPAN cameras finally powered down, and the last reporters filed their stories, the Hart Senate office building fell quiet. But those 31 seconds would echo through American politics for months to come, a reminder that in a democracy, the simplest questions are often the most important ones, and sometimes, the most telling answer is no answer at all. But the story was far from over. At exactly 11:47 p.m. that same evening, behind the closed doors of the Russell Senate office building, emergency meetings were already underway. Republican senators who had confidently promised their support just hours earlier now faced an impossible choice: defend a nominee who couldn't defend the Constitution, or abandon a key Trump appointment and face the wrath of their base. Senator Lindsey Graham paced his office like a caged animal, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. How the hell did we not prepare him for Constitutional Law 101? He demanded of his chief of staff, who sat hunched over a laptop showing the viral clips already approaching 50 million views across all platforms. 3 floors below, Democratic operatives worked through the night, crafting what would become the most devastating political ad of the confirmation cycle. The 30-second spot was brutally simple. Patel's 31-second hesitation played in full, followed by Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, appearing on screen word by word, ending with the tagline, "If he can't say yes to following the law, how can he lead the FBI?" By 6:00 a.m. Eastern Time, the ad was running in every swing state. By 7:00 a.m., it had been shared 15 million times. By 8:00 a.m., even conservative talk radio hosts were struggling to defend what they had witnessed. Rush Limbaugh's replacement opened his show with unprecedented criticism. "Folks, I've defended this administration through everything, but when you can't say yes, I'll follow court orders without hesitation, you've lost the moral authority to lead law enforcement." The morning shows were merciless. NBC's Chuck Todd played the clip 3 times in a row. ABC's George Stephanopoulos brought on constitutional scholars who used words like disqualifying and dangerous. Even Fox and Friends, usually a reliable Trump ally, struggled to provide cover. "Look, we support Director Patel," Steve Doocy said, his voice lacking its usual confidence, but those were some tough questions that maybe needed clearer answers. Behind the scenes, Trump's team was in full crisis mode. At 7:23 a.m., the president's phone rang. It was Patel himself, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "Sir, I can explain the context," Patel began. "Context?" Trump's voice erupted through the phone. "Kash, you looked like a deer in headlights. Schiff made you look weak. Winners don't hesitate when someone asks if they'll follow the law." The call lasted 17 minutes. By its end, both men knew the nomination was doomed, though neither would admit it yet. At 2:15 p.m., the final blow came from an unexpected source. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, representing 30,000 federal agents, released a statement that sent shockwaves through law enforcement. "We cannot support a nominee for FBI Director who appears uncertain about his commitment to following lawful court orders. The Bureau's credibility depends on unwavering adherence to constitutional principles." When even the cops turned against him, Patel's fate was sealed. The withdrawal announcement came at 4:44 p.m., delivered not by Patel himself, but through a terse White House statement. Mr. Patel has decided to withdraw his nomination, to focus on other opportunities to serve the American people. Adam Schiff reached for comment as he left the Capitol, simply smiled and said, "Sometimes the Constitution defends itself. You just have to ask the right questions." In 31 seconds, a career built on constitutional rhetoric had been undone by constitutional reality. The man who promised to drain the swamp had been drained by the Constitution itself, and Adam Schiff had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon in politics isn't opposition research or partisan attacks. It's simply asking someone to explain what they believe about the rule of law. The hearing room sat empty that evening, but those 31 seconds of silence had spoken volumes about the fragility of democratic norms and the power of simple, honest questions to expose dangerous ambitions. In the end, Kash Patel hadn't been destroyed by his enemies. He had been undone by his own inability to say, without hesitation, that the law matters more than loyalty.